I'd like to thank the Wood family who've come great distances to be here to take part in the presentation that Carter's going to be giving you, telling you how this came about, and this was a memorial, if you will, but behind a wonderful cause, and it's had tremendous success, this fellowship program. So Carter will tell you more about it, but could we have the Wood family stand up and just be recognized so people know who you are? Now, before I introduce Carter, this is the moment where I have to tell you to turn off your phones. And there are restrooms on the floors behind us should you need to do that. Carter's presentation is, you see the title of it there. Let me tell you a little bit about him, and maybe more than just a little bit. Dr. Hudgins is an archaeologist, a historian, and he's the acting executive director of Drayton Hall Preservation Trust. Carter has worked in fields of archaeology, history, and historic preservation for 16 years. He doesn't look like he could be working someplace for 16 years, but it's been that long. Prior to coming to us, he worked as a senior staff archaeologist for the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities Jamestown Rediscovery Project. He's completed archaeological field work throughout southeastern North America and the Caribbean, in addition to instructing undergraduate and graduate students. He graduated with a BA in history from Hampton-Sydney College, and he received his MA and Ph.D. degrees in history and material culture from Royal Holloway, University of London. And that's where this kind of the suaveness that he has comes about, I think, for all those years that he was in London. He's lectured and published extensively on the history, archaeology, and material culture of early America and post-medieval England, with a particular focus on the 17th century. He's a board member of the South Carolina State Board of Review for the National Register of Historic Places. He's a board member of Porter Goud Alumni Association. He's an advisory member of the Mayor's Walled City Task Force, an advisory council member of the American College of the Building Arts, a project member of the First Colony Foundation, and an advisory member of the Charleston World Heritage Coalition. So with all of that education and with all of that involvement, I think you really want to hear what Carter has to say. So Carter, please come up.
All right, thank you, Richard. Can everybody hear me? All right. Thanks for that kind introduction, and additional thanks to you and Jill for sponsoring this evening's presentation. I want to thank those of you in attendance, and if I can ask one more group of people to stand up, those members of staff of the Drayton Hall Preservation Trust, please stand up. I want to thank everybody for all your work that you do. Thank you all. Not just for putting on tonight together, but for everything that you do on a day-to-day basis. I want to start off, in addition to that, by acknowledging the members of the Wood family, as Richard has done, but calling out Tony, John, Sarah, her fiance Craig, and two sons, CJ and Andrew. It's through your family's collective journey and generosity that the Wood Family Fellowship has become one of the most significant contributions to the preservation history of 277-year-old Drayton Hall. It is, however, reminiscent of the story of the Phoenix, as the successes we'll hear about tonight have risen following the tragic events that affecting the Wood family. I want to open tonight by asking the audience to consider their definition of historic preservation. Does it concern buildings, landscapes, artifacts, cityscapes, manuscripts, books? What about personal memories and the tangible and intangible memorials to the recent past? To illustrate how all of the above touch each of us and are integral to preserving and building on our past, I want to begin this evening by exploring the personal side of historic preservation as seen through the eyes of the Wood family. For the Wood family, both deliberate and inadvertent experiences guided their daily lives and continue to shape a powerful legacy at Drayton Hall through the Wood Family Fellowship. 2015 marks the 10th year of this fellowship, and you'll hear about the many accomplishments of Wood Family Fellows as the evening progresses. But first, let's travel from Charleston, South Carolina, to Charleston, Illinois, one of the 50 safest cities in Illinois. Here, parents Tanya and Leonard Wood raised their sons Stephen, Anthony, and John, and daughter Sarah. Originally from New York City, the young family moved to the Midwest when Leonard was offered his first teaching position as a professor of history at Eastern Illinois University. At the time, Charleston was a small college of 16,000 people with acres and acres and acres of surrounding corn and soybean fields. Anthony Wood, known fondly to us as Tony, has visions of these fields etched into his memory, as well as the historic houses he grew up in. First, a wood frame Victorian, and later a brick farmhouse. Both were filled with books, and each provided a setting for the ritualistic viewing of the new evening news with Walter Cronkite. Mother Tanya contributed to a constant sense of civic involvement in the home as she ran her own bookstore, operated her own theater company, and was known to periodically write concerned citizen letters to the local paper. An equally significant dynamic to the Wood family home was the subject of history. Given Leonard's role as a historian and educator, history was always in the air as he wrote civic and history textbooks and was always trying to bring history alive, even at home. According to Tony, we would hear about his research and his writing, his discovery of a black cowboy that he could bring into a narrative, his way of trying to engage students through creative text with descriptions of how the sun sparkled off the Viking shield. We heard about the politics of history, how the Texas version of the textbook had to be approved by a state commission that was very conservative, and what that meant for history and how it was to be presented. In addition to home life, family travels had a direct impact on the Wood family children. There were, of course, visits to Civil War battlefields such as Gettysburg, and historic sites such as Fort Ticonderoga. Yet even outside of historic sites and museums, everywhere the family went, they always admired old houses. According to Tony, this was not done in a serious academic way, studying styles, but rather enjoying their beauty and the context of their old neighborhoods. For our family, this was a form of recreation. Other journeys entailed family reunions that connected history to the present and nurtured education. From his experience at Wood family reunions in Western Pennsylvania, Tony recalls a great aunt who always reported on family genealogy and who happily announced she had traced the family back to Charlemagne. These family reunions coincided with visits to local cemeteries to see the monuments to deceased family members and hearing stories about them. On his father's side, Tony's grandmother had been a school teacher before becoming a full-time mother on a farm in rural Pennsylvania, and because of her education, academics were highly valued in the family. On his mother's side, Tony's grandmother immigrated from Sweden and his grandfather from Russia. Both held Ph.D.s and worked as educators and authors running a progressive private school, Cherry Lawn, in Connecticut with a very diverse faculty, including many from Europe. Unsurprisingly, with the nurturing of their parents and grandparents and such a pedigree of history and education, two of Tanya and Leonard Wood's children devoted themselves to the practices of historic preservation. For middle brother Tony, an undergraduate degree from Kenyon College and a summer fellowship at historic Deerfield led to a master's degree in urban planning from the University of Illinois. Intermittently since 1991, he's been a member of the adjunct faculty of the preservation program in the Columbia University Graduate Program of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, and has served as the executive director of the Idelson Foundation since 1993. Prior to this date, Tony was the chief program officer at the J.M. Kaplan Fund and worked at the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission and at the Municipal Art Society. Tony's lifelong dedication to preservation initiatives, including volunteer service for a wide array of preservation and conservation organizations that, when listed, appear like the opening credits to Star Wars, Adding to this list, however, Tony's also served as the chairman of the Drayton Hall Advisory Council and currently serves on the board of the Drayton Hall Preservation Trust. He's also published a book, Preserving New York, which charts the preservation efforts in New York City. Older brother Stephen also embarked on a career in historic preservation. Differing from younger brother Tony's work in urban planning and preservation advocacy, however, Stephen placed emphasis on the conservation of buildings, the bricks and mortar side of preservation. Stephen graduated with honors in 1975 from the University of Illinois, Urbana, with a degree in American history. It was during this time that Stephen identified a passion to become a restoration carpenter. Turning down a fully funded fellowship in history at Claremont Graduate University, Stephen turned his efforts to the construction industry, gaining valuable skills in carpentry, painting, and interior finishing. In 1977, Stephen's passion for history, building trades, and historic buildings coalesced as he was offered a role as a restoration and interpretive specialist at the Peter Madison Tavern Museum in Shaftesbury, Vermont. 1 year prior, the tavern suffered extensive fire damage, and Stephen was hired to work with a team of specialists to restore the building and open it to the public. Such an experience, in Stephen's own words, quote, confirmed my desire to integrate my interest in history and carpentry in a career in building restoration, end quote. And this led to his position as an apprentice in the National Trust for Historic Preservation Restoration Workshop. This post entailed a variety of restoration work at properties of the National Trust, including Lyndhurst, Cliveden, Belgrove, and Drayton Hall. Stephen arrived at Drayton Hall in early 1979, just 4 years after the Drayton family transferred the site to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. During his time on site, Stephen completed a variety of carpentry and masonry projects needed to ensure the preservation of the site. Tragically, on August 5th, 1980, Stephen was busy completing masonry work when the supporting scaffolding gave way. He fell to the ground below and later that day succumbed to his injuries, leaving behind his parents Tanya and Leonard, brothers Tony and John, and sister Sarah. Some 24 years later, misfortune revisited the Wood family as the lives of parents Leonard and Tanya were claimed in an automobile accident while traveling east of their home in Charleston, Illinois. Amid such tragedies, Drayton Hall has served as both a family memorial and a source of inspiration for Tony. While his brother's life was taken by work at Drayton Hall, it was work Stephen loved, and the site endures today as both a monument to our American past and the contemporary efforts undertaken by preservationists such as Stephen to preserve our national treasure. Moreover, Tony and his brothers and sister were reared on the lessons of history and the value of preservation taught by their loving parents. Thus, for Tony, Drayton Hall furthers an important cycle begun by his parents and followed by his siblings that spans from education to preservation to advocacy and leadership. To further the legacy of his brother and parents in a manner that would build on the Wood family's values and dedication to education and historic preservation, Tony and his husband, Anthony Badalamenti, established the Wood Family Fellowship at Drayton Hall in 2005. By design, the fellowship is intended to foster the care and research of Drayton Hall while providing guidance and inspiration to rising scholars in the fields of history, historic preservation, anthropology, decorative arts, and architectural history. As we will see tonight, the products of the fellowship have literally and physically resulted in Drayton Hall being rediscovered as the research findings and preservation initiatives have stretched beyond initial expectations. Work by fellows has moved the site beyond consideration as simply a low-country plantation, and it is now understood as South Carolina's most significant colonial estate due to its history, design, preservation, and connection to the present. What's more, the fellowship's launch in 2005 was roughly concurrent to the establishment of Drayton Hall's Preservation Department in 2006. Through their quality work and the desire for Drayton Hall to improve its stewardship of historical resources, 4 fellows, myself, Joyce Keegan, Sarah Stroud-Clark, and Tris Smith, transitioned to full-time employment at Drayton Hall within the Preservation Department and have been dedicated to the care and advancement of the site's past ever since. When I sat down to compose this presentation, I initially marched through the 10 years of fellowship year by year and thought it best to summarize the work of each fellow individually. With further thought, though, it became apparent that each fellowship was not completed in isolation and should not be discussed as such. Our work has been complementary and multidisciplinary, building on the work of those fellows and scholars that became before us. Accordingly, I decided to knit aspects of each fellowship into a temporal narrative that recounts aspects of the site's history alongside our continued work to understand and preserve the past. So let's go back 300 years to 1715. The Carolina colony was only 45 years old, and in this year, John Drayton, the builder of Drayton Hall, was born into one of South Carolina's founding families to parents Thomas and Ann Drayton at their Magnolia plantation. Regarding John Drayton, literally an international man of mystery due to an absence of public records from his first 20 years, the earliest dated clues to his persona come in the form of an arithmetic book and a collection of rare ornithological watercolors, both dated 1733, which I was charged to research during my 2006 fellowship. The arithmetic book provides the only direct indication that Drayton received an education to become a planner and financial administrator, but lacks any indication of where Drayton received his training. The watercolors, however, provided additional clues. And I want to point out from the outset that these are not prints. These are very, very rare watercolors in the process of studying the natural world. And they were rediscovered by the Drayton family in 1969 and originally attributed to Drayton or one of his children. Subsequent research by Margaret Pritchard, Sumter Priddy, and myself in 2006 identified, however, that the watercolors were produced and received from George Edwards, the father of British ornithology, fellow of London's Royal Society, and close colleague of Mark Catesby. Such were composed as efforts to understand and classify the natural world. Edwards never traveled to North America, which indicates that Drayton may have been in Europe and London specifically to receive these paintings directly from Edwards in 1733. This theory is supported by the fact that Drayton's name appears as a subscriber or financer of Edwards' printed works on ornithology. Interestingly, Drayton was the only North American subscriber to Edwards' first volume of A Natural History of Birds, printed in 1743, and then one of only 3 North American subscribers, including Benjamin Franklin, to later volumes of this work. Older than Drayton Hall itself, these incredibly rare artifacts illustrate that John Drayton, who was only 18 when he received the watercolors, was much more than a colonial planner. Indeed, he was educated, well connected to the transatlantic intellectual community of the 18th century, and played an important part of the British Enlightenment as he financially supported endeavors in natural history, architecture, and design. Today, thanks to the stewardship of the Drayton family and the leadership of Ben and Cindy Lenhart, and many of you in the audience, 21 of John Drayton's collection of George Edwards watercolors have returned to Drayton Hall. And I will point out, reproductions of these works, produced by Joel Oppenheimer, are available for sale. 100% of the sale stays at Drayton Hall. And our visitor service director, Allison Jordan, is happy to help you out. They're beautiful. Jumping 5 years to 1738, young 23-year-old John Drayton purchased an advertised 350-acre tract of property on the banks of the Ashley River next to Magnolia Plantation, where he began construction of Drayton Hall. Conceived as a home seat, this property served as a management center at the heart of his commercial plantation empire of 76,000 acres, where the efforts of enslaved people raised cattle, pigs, for exportation to the Caribbean sugar islands, and grew rice and indigo for international markets. The income generated from Drayton's commercial holdings resulted in a significant degree of wealth that enabled the construction of his masterpiece, Drayton Hall, shown here in 1765. Regarded as an architectural treasure for generations, Drayton Hall's significance reached new height through the work of 2008 and 2010 Wood Family Fellows Natalie Woodward and Trish Smith. Each arrived at Drayton Hall in the midst of their graduate studies at the Clemson College of Charleston Graduate Program in Historic Preservation, and measured and recorded both the interior and exterior of the house, the privy, in the garden house with the help of AutoCAD, or computer-aided design software. In doing so, completed the first accurate drawings of Drayton Hall's historic architecture. Such drawings were used by Smith during her graduate studies as she sought to determine what sources of inspiration contributed to the overall composition of the house. With the contemporaneous discovery of a list of architectural pattern books and sources for design once found in John Drayton's library, Smith was able to determine that Drayton was an active participant and leader in the construction of his house, as he drew from contemporary British designs by James Gibbs, William Salmon, Colin Campbell, Isaac Ware, Batty Langley, and others. Far more than a wealthy patron, Drayton played a central role in the design of his house, which is now understood as the first fully executed example of Palladian architecture constructed in North America. While firm evidence of Drayton's European education remains a mystery, discoveries such as those by Smith and Woodward indicate that Drayton was in England during the early years of his life, where he was exposed to the spread of Anglo-Palladianism, only to return home and build his own Palladian masterpiece. After the completion of her master's degree in historic preservation, Smith was hired as a preservation technician at Drayton Hall, and today, as the site's curator of historic architectural resources, Trish manages the care and operation of Drayton Hall's historic buildings and associated artifacts, and continues to utilize the products of her fellowship to create digital models of the main house. While the preservation of philosophy of Drayton Hall calls for the stabilization and preservation of the house as it was received from the Drayton family in 1974, we continually desire to see what the house looked like in the 18th century. Using a variety of software platforms and laser scanning technology, Smith is able to virtually reconstruct how the house appeared ahead of 19th century modifications. As a sample of her work, let's take a peek at the stair hall located at the rear of the house overlooking the Ashley River. Here it is today, and here it is in the summer of 1765. Smith's models of Drayton Hall are not only visually stunning, but function as an active archive of research that are created according to scholarly research and can be altered as our understanding of Drayton Hall advances. While this type of work is in its infancy, as work continues, we hope to model the entire house to demonstrate how it was originally constructed and adapted over the course of 3 centuries. Given its status as a masterpiece of architectural design, in its current unfurnished state, it's only natural to question how Drayton Hall was outfitted in the 18th century. Helping to answer this and many additional questions was Joyce Keegan, the first Wood Family Fellow at Drayton Hall. After completing her master's degree in the history of American decorative arts, offered by the Smithsonian and the New School and the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts Summer Institute, Joyce took residence at Drayton Hall in 2005 with a focus on the 18th and 19th century furniture found within Drayton Hall's collection. Prior to this date, little attention had been directed to the site's museum collection, and Joyce helped turn this around. Joyce's research shed new light on Drayton Hall's furniture collection, expanded Drayton Hall's network to include prominent decorative art scholars, and represented an exemplary first step in preparing the collection for future exhibition. Hired as Drayton Hall's collections manager, after her fellowship, Joyce went on to oversee the creation of collections management and conservation plans, and continued her research. Today, it's clear that Joyce's fellowship and subsequent work has helped set in motion Drayton Hall's desire to become one of the preeminent Southern institutions curating 18th century decorative arts. Symbolic of this vision are the 27 objects from our collection on display at Colonial Williamsburg in the DeWitt Wallace galleries that once graced Drayton Hall's interiors. Early in her tenure as a Wood Family Fellow, Joyce was instrumental in highlighting the international significance of her collection, and this has been reinforced by recent collaboration. John Drayton's bureau bookcase, for instance, has been referenced by Ron Hurst, Colonial Williamsburg's senior curator, is the finest piece of furniture to survive in colonial America from the colonial period. Fabricated in the British Isles with extraordinary gilt pulls, 13 secret compartments, a mirrored prospect, and composed of wood from every continent except Antarctica, this object was more of a statement of status than function. Additional function, such as John Drayton's chairs, settee, and a trio of marble slab tables, have been identified by Shannon Devlin as possibly the earliest examples of Rococo furniture in the colonies, thus reinforcing our understanding of Drayton Hall as one of the most significant home seats from the colonial period. Building on Joyce's success, we're ramping up our own conservation efforts in the hopes of exhibiting these and other items from our collection at Drayton Hall and in Charleston in years to come. In the meantime, we're working to identify additional furniture and objects that may have originated from Drayton Hall, only to be dispersed due to wars, financial hardship, and changes in ownership. Trish Smith is also working to model the furniture for inclusion in her models of the house. Seen here is the bureau bookcase in the withdrawing room, a possible location suggested by Joyce through her ongoing research. Additional research on John Drayton's material culture was carried out in 2006 by myself after completing my BA at Hampton-Sydney College in Virginia and Ph.D. in History and Material Culture at the University of London. I returned to Drayton Hall, where I'd previously served on the landscape crew, to serve as the second Wood Family Fellow. Alongside research of the George Edwards watercolors, I completed the most rigorous analysis of the Drayton papers to date, while the intention was to uncover new information about the original construction of the house. I was more successful in fusing cartographic and documentary materials to cover aspects of Drayton Hall's overall landscape. Shown here is a map of Drayton Hall in 1791. At the center is the main house and flanking dependencies with formal and picturesque gardens stretching from the Ashley River to the Ashley River Road. From descriptions, it's now understood that the formal entrance to Drayton Hall was by road rather than by river, and the landscape played a central role in how one experienced Drayton Hall. Formal progression through the site was dictated by one's status, and the formal gardens were screened by the main house and associated architecture, including the colonnade walls. Once invited within, guests would have experienced exotic and ornamental plant varieties alongside of fountains, statuary, a bowling green, and the garden house. While time is precious this evening, it's worth noting that Drayton placed as much emphasis on the design and layout of his gardens as he did on the main house. Such formed a cohesive unit that expressed his status within the Carolina colony and his connections to the most popular designs available in the Old World. While much of Drayton Hall's 18th century survives above ground and in the archives, Drayton Hall's 2007 Wood Family Fellow, Sarah Stroud Clark, focused on the site's excavated material culture and has successfully established archaeology as a discipline and an ethic that is now central to our preservation efforts. Prior to her time as a Wood Family Fellow, Sarah completed extensive work in historical archaeology in Virginia and California, completing an undergraduate degree at Randolph-Macon's Women's College and a master's degree at San Diego State University. Upon arrival at Drayton Hall in 2007, Sarah was charged with an enormous task, organizing the more than 1 million artifacts excavated at Drayton Hall in the 1970s and 1980s. While all had been washed and labeled with their excavation context, Sarah was confronted with uncatalogued artifacts stored in disintegrating plastic bags due to years of storage in an uncontrolled condition, only to be organized by material type rather than by context. For archaeologists, artifact context is everything. Without knowledge of where an artifact was originally found, it is impossible to identify how areas of the site were used over time or where a particular event took place. So with extraordinary patience, Sarah began sorting Drayton Hall's archaeology collection according to context and rehousing them in archival materials. The work during her fellowship led to a significant grant issued by the Institute for Museum and Library Services, which funded the completion of artifact rehousing, the establishment of an archaeological laboratory, and the creation of a study collection. Sarah's work to organized the collection has also facilitated a collaborative partnership between Drayton Hall and the Digital Archaeological Archive of Comparative Slavery at Monticello in Virginia to catalog the collection ahead of rigorous analysis to determine more about the lives of the Drayton family and the enslaved people that lived and worked at Drayton Hall. In the years since her fellowship, Sarah's taken on the role of both archaeologist and curator of collections for Drayton Hall, and she'll continue to shepherd the cataloging of our immense archaeological collection for years to come. While the work is just beginning, we're already gleaning exciting new insight into the material culture of one of colonial America's greatest estates. From dress accessories to scientific instruments and even toys, we can see how John Drayton spared no expense in consuming the finest material goods available in the British Empire, and how enslaved Africans carried out native traditions while in bondage. This is particularly apparent through examples of Drayton Hall's ceramics and glass assemblage as delicate stemware, ornate porcelains, and exceptional colonno wares are some of the rarest archaeological items to be identified in North America. Nevertheless, the power of these artifacts lies in the fact that we can connect them to the Drayton family and the enslaved people that once called Drayton Hall. Again, context is everything. Given our budding knowledge of ceramics, glass, and the material culture associated with dining at Drayton Hall, it's only natural to wonder what was on the 18th century menu. Our archaeological glass collection suggests tantalizing dishes such as sweetmeats, syllabubs, but even more detailed information emerged through the work of 2013 Wood Family Fellow and zooarchaeologist Jenna Carlson. Jenna completed her master's degree in arts and archaeology at Illinois State University and is currently completing her Ph.D. in anthropology and archaeology at the College of William and Mary, where she's recently been tapped as an adjunct professor. Jenna's work at Drayton Hall concerned the analysis of approximately 150,000 animal bones, known as faunal remains, excavated from an 18th century well found just south of Drayton Hall's south flanker and excavated in 1979 and 1980. This massive quantity of bones was transported to Jenna's laboratory in Williamsburg, Virginia, sorted according to context or layer within the well, and then identified according to order, family, genus, and species. Jenna's analysis was able to shed light on what animals were located on and around Drayton Hall in the 18th century, as well as what the animals may have been doing there. According to Jenna, the faunal assemblage from the south flanker well represents a snapshot of the plantation landscape of the 18th century at Drayton Hall. Within and across this landscape, humans and animals engaged in a number of relationships. Some of these relationships were dietary, whereby animals formed the meat diet of Drayton Hall's residents. Domesticated animals, especially cattle, dominated the meat diet, but not at the exclusion of a number of wild species, including opossums, raccoons, ducks, shorebirds, turtles, and fish. Animals at Drayton Hall also formed part of the workforce, entering into laboring relationships with the human residents of the population. Regarding dietary information, fish were found in significant numbers, yet only 2% of the total faunal percentage. These included sunfish, fresh and saltwater catfishes, suckers, croaker, drum, and perch. Unlike the fish, mammals represented 93% of the total biomass, including cattle, with a high volume of calf heads. Pigs were found to represent 7% of this total, with still fewer sheep, goats, and white-tailed deer. Still fewer, yet present, were horses. Small animals, including opossums, raccoons, rats, including Rattus rattus, the plague-carrying rat variety, rabbits, squirrels, mice, bats, and even domesticated cats were identified. Birds ironically represented a small biomass from the well, including chickens, ducks, and geese. Also of interest were reptiles, such as frogs, toads, snakes, and turtles. In total, despite the number of wild individuals represented in the well assemblage, the meat diet of 18th century Drayton Hall appears to have been based off of domesticated animals, such as pigs, cattle, and sheep, and goats, that contributed nearly half of the biomass from the south flanker well. From Jenna's research and contemporary cookbooks, some of which are noted as being present at Drayton Hall, we see that calves' heads were often fare of the 18th century elites, thus emphasizing the European influence on Low Country cooking. Over 80% of the calf remains from the South Flanker well were head elements, including skull and mandible fragments. In her handwritten recipe book, Harriet Pinckney Horry, the wife of 18th century South Carolina planter Daniel U.G. Horry, included a recipe for dressing a calf's head, which called for placing half of the head in the center of the platter and dressing it with a stewed concoction made with the other half of the head. Such was apparently enjoyed at Drayton Hall, along with another of other primarily fashion from domesticated animals. We're fortunate that Jenna's research during her Wood Family Fellowship is now being incorporated into her doctoral study of 18th century plantations, including Oxon Hill Manor in Maryland, Mount Vernon and Jamestown in Virginia, and Stobo Plantation in South Carolina. Work is ongoing, but it's expected that Jenna will continue to tease out the differences between Low Country and Chesapeake diets and the manners in which animals were utilized for commercial purposes. Now, from Jenna's research, it's safe to say that few vegetarians dined at Drayton Hall in the 18th century. Jokes aside, the dietary themes of her research naturally stimulate inquiries into who was dining at Drayton Hall. Moreover, given the glimpses of John Drayton's intellectual pursuits discussed this evening, ranging from architecture to natural history, what was the makeup of John Drayton's peer group? Tackling this subject was Sean Uratia, the 2011 Wood Family Fellow who traveled to Drayton Hall for a summer of research during the midst of his graduate studies in public history at Middle Tennessee State University. Sean was charged with investigating the, quote, intellectual landscapes of John Drayton and his son Charles, who assumed ownership of Drayton Hall in 1784 following his father's death. A source central to Sean's work was the recently discovered list of books divided by discipline, natural philosophy shown here, that once made up of John Drayton's library. The associated titles were found to reflect Drayton's intellectual pursuits and personal connections, thus shedding new light on the 18th century composition of Drayton Hall's architecture and surrounding physical landscape. At the conclusion of his work, Sean was able to state that Drayton's library makes it clear that he had a level of knowledge and education that was on par with the leading figures of the British Enlightenment. Few titles in the library were common titles or those meant for a casual read. Instead, Drayton surrounded himself with books representing an advanced understanding of numerous academic disciplines, including hydraulics, astronomy, engineering, biology, ancient histories, religion, and even botanical classifications that predated the Linnaean system. Knowledge of Drayton's reading habits point to a rigorous education, and we're now just beginning to connect Drayton's library to physical landscape features. For instance, Drayton possessed a number of specialized engineering works, including Stephen Switzer's Introduction to Hydrostatics and Hydraulics, which was undoubtedly used to create and maintain fountains that Drayton is recorded to have placed on the riverside of Drayton Hall. A second substantial title is Philip Miller's Gardener's Calendar and Dictionary. Miller was a Scottish gardener that was in charge of the Chelsea Physics Garden and was praised by some as the most outstanding gardens throughout Europe. Miller's Gardener's Calendar and Dictionary is an extensive work that attempts to classify plants according to their genus. It provided readers the ability to maintain a common language among plant species and to properly apply that knowledge to their gardens. Miller's efforts to extend his knowledge from Chelsea through Prent also included methods on constructing vineyards and pleasure gardens, features that are now being identified at Drayton Hall through their physical and documented remains. Aside from John Drayton, Sean was equally successful in exposing the intellectual landscapes of John Drayton's second son, Charles Drayton. Born at Drayton Hall in 1743, Charles departed the Low Country as a teenager, attending grade school in London, college in Oxford, and medical school at the University of Edinburgh. Graduating with his doctorate in 1770, Dr. Charles gained an array of valuable intellectual connections at Edinburgh that he maintained throughout his later years. From professors including William Cullen, John Hope, and Alexander Monroe, to peers such as Benjamin Rush and Adam Kuhn, William Weathering, and Peter Faso. While we don't have time to fully investigate these connections this evening, it's fair to point out that Sean's research creates a larger picture of Charles Drayton than previously understood. He was far more complex than the simple son of a wealthy planter and should be credited for more than living through the Scottish Enlightenment, as he was actually an actual participant in the Enlightenment. His personal connections and intellectual lifestyle resulted in alterations to Drayton Hall and a constant influx of plant species that, more importantly, advanced human medicine and botany. By exposing the intellectual landscapes of John and Charles, Sean brought broader knowledge of how the pair viewed their home seat and their position within the expanding Atlantic world. With the death of Charles Drayton in 1820, Drayton Hall passed to his son, Charles Drayton II. The younger Charles was also a physician, and interestingly, trained under his father's University of Edinburgh colleague and founding father of our nation, Benjamin Rush. Despite this connection, however, both archaeological and documentary evidence suggests that Drayton Hall underwent a major change in the years immediately following 1820, as it appears that Drayton Hall ceased to be used as a formal home seat due to greater attention being placed on urban living. Indeed, for Charles Drayton II, his son, Charles Drayton III, and grandson, Charles Henry Drayton, Drayton Hall was used to cultivate agricultural commodities such as corn. And with the conclusion of the Civil War, there was a consideration to dismantle Drayton Hall for the sale of its bricks. This brings up an age-old question. With surrounding plantations being burned during the Civil War, how did Drayton Hall survive? Wood family fellow John Harris sought to answer this question in 2011 following his completion of undergraduate and master's degrees at Queen's University, Belfast. At the center of Harris's work are the Drayton brothers, James Shoolbred, Thomas Henry Middleton, and John. Their older brother, Charles Drayton III, owned Drayton Hall until his death in 1852, at which time the property passed to his 5-year-old son, Charles Henry Drayton, shown here on the bottom right. Until Charles Henry could assume full ownership through age, uncles John and Thomas acted as stewards of the 586-acre ancestral home. The managing pair oversaw the operation of Drayton Hall, which was home at the time to 32 slaves, but they also had other interests. In 1855, John had completed a degree at Charleston's Medical University to become a doctor, and around 1860, Thomas's agricultural ambitions had taken him beyond the Carolinas to Brazoria County in East Texas. There, he brought a plantation named El Dorado and produced so much cotton in the first year that his 47 slaves had run out of rope to bind it. Harris's research uncovered an assemblage of written records composed by the three brothers in the years leading up to the American Civil War that make it clear that they embraced the conflict. To them, it was an opportunity to defend Southern honor and, ironically, freedom. At the war's inception, James submitted a rallying cry to a local newspaper urging Carolinians to meet the Northern challenge immediately and without mercy. "Your country now calls you. Arm to the teeth," he wrote. Thomas delivered a similar sentiment, noting instruction to his brother, kill every devil of a Yankee you can. On November 12, 1861, James joined the 3rd Carolina Artillery Battalion and prepared for his first post on James Island, while Thomas joined Captain A.J. Terry's mounted company in April of 1862. Brother John also committed to the cause, yet his expertise as a physician lay in preserving life rather than taking it. On October 1862, Dr. John entered into contract with the Confederate Army to provide care for the 500 slaves hired to raise earthworks on Fort Bull. This was followed in 1863 by a second post where he attended enslaved laborers strengthening the defenses on James Island. By early 1865, it became clear that the Drayton brothers' resistance would be in vain, and the evacuation of Charleston was issued on February 15th. Charleston's surrender was accepted 3 days later, and the Ashley River plantations, such as Drayton Hall, remained undisturbed as Union troops had advanced in the Low Country from the south. Within a week, however, units of the 54th New York Volunteers and the 36th United States Colored Troops were scouting along Ashley River Road, often pausing to plunder and burning all but 2 estates. So how did Drayton Hall survive? The most widely accepted hypothesis draws on both contemporary evidence and family legend and suggests that Dr. John turned the plantation house into an infirmary where he tended to slaves infected with smallpox or cholera while outside displaying yellow flags. While aspects of this theory are undoubtedly true, Harris's research did uncover additional details written by Dr. Henry Orlando Marcy, a surgeon with the 35th United States Colored Troops, which patrolled the Ashley River area in late February of 1865. As reported by Harris, Marcy wrote in his autobiography that he approached John Drayton's brick house, where he found the overseer and wife who had evidently not abandoned the plantation, nor the slaves. He goes on to note how he set about seizing a quantity of corn and meal and silver before departing. Such a description is fascinating as it indicates that some members of the enslaved community had not run to the advancing Union lines and that corn production continued at the plantation during the war. Marcy does not mention the infirmary, yet denotes a certain amount of agricultural activity and slave life that may have spared the site's destruction. Regardless of Drayton Hall's survival, the Drayton family remained deeply embittered by military rule and early Reconstruction after the war. As a result, at the close of 1865, John and James Drayton migrated to Brazoria County, Texas, the home of Brother Thomas. Tragically, and perhaps ironically, in 1866, an apparent yellow fever outbreak took the lives of James and Thomas Drayton. John survived and migrated to Mexico after 1870, where he became the U.S. consul in Tuxpan prior to his death in 1912. According to Harris, Dr. John Drayton's longevity contrasts sharply with the overall story of the Drayton family during the war and early Reconstruction. Rather than continuity, the period was marked by profound and dramatic change. In fact, the transformations that occurred in the 1860s cannot be matched across the family's 7-generation association with Drayton Hall. During the short period the family encountered a rapidly and radically changing society. They endured military defeat and occupation, the dissolution of considerable wealth and slaves, and the evaporation of a labor system that had been in place at Drayton Hall for over 100 years. The majority of Drayton Hall's inhabitants had always been slaves. Now they were free. This was the greatest transformation of all. For many of Drayton Hall's former slaves, the post-emancipation world revolved around the mining of calcium phosphate. In the years leading up to the American Civil War, deposits of phosphate had been identified in the Ashley River region, and following 1865, the extraction of this material offered new economic opportunities to former planters and former slaves. By 1870, phosphate mining was the state's second largest industry, and many properties along the Ashley River, including Drayton Hall, played host to this business. In an effort to improve our understanding of Drayton Hall and the African American community that called Drayton Hall into the 20th century, Tony Carrier was selected as the 2012 Wood Family Fellow. Tony is the founding director of Low Country Africana, an all-volunteer research project and website dedicated to African American history and genealogy in South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, and has extensive expertise conducting postbellum historical research through the use of manuscripts and oral history interviews. Tony's work identified how phosphate mining was a major determinant of life and landscape at Drayton Hall from the 1860s until 1910. Given that the community at Drayton Hall was predominantly African American and these individuals participated in the phosphate industry, the community remained homogeneous demographically, and there was a marked absence of racial competition and strife. This was supported by Carrier's oral history research, in which respondents stated that Drayton Hall's location outside of Charleston made it a safe place to live because residents were not exposed to social problems that existed in town. Living descendants recall several small communities and 2 cemeteries around Drayton Hall associated with the mining community. It is across this landscape that the people of Drayton Hall created values and community standards that resulted in peaceful accord and an absence of interpersonnel strife in the postbellum community. Tony's work revealed that Drayton Hall's African-American families strove to be tightly knit, typically grounded in a two-parent household structure where strategies of self-sufficiency, cooperation, and educational advancement were pursued despite outside pressures of segregation. What's more, religion, individual responsibility, and community support were upheld as core values. The values of this postbellum community continued to be realized in the lives and careers of many descendants after they left Drayton Hall in search of new economic opportunities following the collapse of the phosphate industry. Many became teachers, ministers, nurses, housewives, social workers, lab technicians, agricultural specialists, business people, and community leaders. Even after their departure, the descendants were found to continually voice positive attachment to Drayton Hall, attachment they heard from their ancestors. Today, the positive energy is experienced by everyone who's worked at Drayton Hall following the National Trust acquisition of the property in 1975. Indeed, several aspects of Wood Family Fellowships have centered on the preservation of the recent past in order to safeguard the site's future. Natalie Ford Woodward, for example, played a lead role in the conservation of Drayton Hall's late 19th century paint, knowing that this Victorian alteration of the house serves as a key marker of how the site transitioned in the years following the Civil War. Equally important, Trish Smith created an electronic preservation archive containing a scanned copy of every scrap of paper produced through the preservation initiatives over the last 40 years. Each has played a key role in our understanding of how the work that was done to stabilize the house and enhances the development of current and future preservation work. Even this year's fellow, Brittany Lavelle Tula, is working to record the modern history of Drayton Hall. Tula, a graduate of the Clemson College of Charleston graduate program in historic preservation, there may be a theme here, is actively researching institutional records from 1970 to 1990 and conducting oral history interviews with those individuals who played a role in the development of Drayton Hall as a historic site. While still in progress, Tula's work will provide an understanding of the human elements that contributed to Drayton Hall's modern successes. In conclusion, I'd like to thank each of Drayton Hall's Wood Family Fellows. You've each transformed Drayton Hall, and I trust that Drayton Hall has transformed you. Lastly, I cannot offer enough gratitude to Tony and his husband, Anthony. I believe everyone in the audience will agree that your generosity and vision has made a lasting impact on a site of international importance that we all love. I believe Stephen, Leonard, and Anthony would be proud of all that we've accomplished in their names. Thank you.